The streets of Madison hadn't changed much. The old bakery on corner 7th still had its neon open sign flickering in and out, and the maple trees lining the residential stretch from Monroe to the east end of Lake Monona were just starting to shed that golden crunch under my boots. Familiar, like a memory I didn't ask for but couldn't avoid. I turned onto the gravel driveway of the private funeral home. It stood like a relic from another time, white-painted Victorian with fading gingerbread trim and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. That creak used to mean summer lemonade and gossip with Grandma. Today, it sounded like a warning. No one was outside. I parked slowly, cut the engine, and let silence fill the car. My hands didn't reach for the door right away. I sat there, staring at the entrance, my fingers brushing the envelope resting in the glove box. Grandma's handwriting still sharp. I hadn't opened it. No one had told me when the funeral would start. Not officially. I found out through a cousin's Facebook post. No text from my mother, no call from Alethea. Still, I came. It felt like something I owed, not to them, but to the woman who made my sandwiches after school and taught me to braid my hair without snapping every strand. As I stepped inside, the smell hit first, polish and lilies. Always lilies. The hallway felt narrower than it should have, like it was folding in on itself. A soft murmur echoed from deeper in the home, but no one greeted me. Not even a nod from the man at the guest book. Just a glance and a blank line for my name. The viewing room was dressed like a catalog spread. Casket draped in white, flower arrangements fanned out like they were auditioning for a wedding shoot, and the family seated in stiff rows like mannequins. Alethea was at the front, hair curled just right, pearls at her throat. She turned, saw me, and looked away just as fast, like she'd touched something dirty. My mother didn't even glance. She sat perfectly upright, handkerchief in lap, eyes forward, controlled. I paused near the door, unsure whether to walk forward or back out. But someone cleared their throat behind me, and suddenly I was moving, slow steps down the side aisle, eyes burning. I wasn't late, I thought, but I still feel like I missed the moment. I sat alone, 3 rows behind the family. No one shifted to make space. My cousin Nora turned slightly to whisper something to her husband, who then looked back at me like I'd wandered in from the street. The silence wasn't out of reverence. It was choreographed. As I adjusted in my seat, something caught my eye. A display near the casket. It was a memory board. Dozens of photos pinned with delicate gold clips, all perfectly aligned, all faces familiar. I stood up and walked over, slowly, careful not to disturb the scene they'd curated so precisely. There were photos from birthdays, holidays, beach vacations, all centered around Grandma. But in every single one, I was missing. I blinked, looked again. There was the Hawaii trip I'd booked and paid for, with Grandma holding a coconut drink and Alethea in a sundress I loaned her. But the third figure, me, was cropped out. The photo ended in a neat vertical slice where my arm should have been. "You were always the one holding the camera, weren't you?" Alethea's voice slid in beside me like cold water. She didn't look at me when she said it, just smiled and turned back to the front. "Not that one," I muttered. My voice barely made it past my lips. No one responded. My Aunt Louise glanced at me briefly and said, "Well, you haven't been around much, dear." Her voice was flat, performative, like she was reciting a line. That wall wasn't about remembering Grandma, it was about rewriting who counted. And clearly, I didn't. I walked back to my seat slower than I left it, heart pounding with something colder than anger. It was clarity, not a new wound, just an old one, no longer numb. They had erased me with surgical precision. I sat down and stared ahead. My mind drifted, not to the flowers or the prayer someone had started reading, but to the things that hadn't been said for years. The whispered corrections when I spoke up, the eye rolls when I brought up therapy, gaslighted by omission, left out of group photos, ignored in group texts. All of it part of a pattern, polished and quiet. When my father died, I was 20, the only one who ever saw me without judgment, gone overnight. Mom didn't cry at the funeral. She ironed napkins. After that, she made Alethea her project, her second chance. Alethea didn't even have to try. She just fit. She wore the right lipstick, dated the right men, said the right things. She was the daughter who didn't challenge her. I became the footnote. Once my therapist told me people will burn the truth to keep their version warm. I didn't believe her then. Now, standing in this room full of staged mourning and cropped photos, I believed it too well. I came expecting distance. I didn't expect to be a stranger at my own family's grief. If this is how they honor the dead, I thought, what would they do to the living? The ceremony dragged on, words blending into background static. I tried to focus, but everything felt like an echo chamber built to reflect one version of Grandma, and none of it was real. Not to me. Just as I began to shift in my seat, the floor creaked beside me. Alethea. She leaned in with the grace of a dancer, placing one manicured hand on my shoulder. Her voice, honeyed and precise, was just low enough to avoid drawing attention. Let's not make this about you today. I didn't move. I didn't blink. The hand stayed there for a moment longer, then lifted. My gaze stayed locked forward, not on the casket, but on the photo wall. They'd spent so long silencing me that they forgot one thing. I was still here. And that was the moment I realized this funeral wasn't just for my grandmother. It was for the memory of me, too. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My tears would have been wasted on people who called them dramatics. After the final hymn, most of the guests moved toward the hallway connecting the viewing room to the reception space. I walked slower than the rest, keeping distance not just from them, but from the performance they all seemed to have rehearsed. I wasn't there for the refreshments or to shake hands with people who forgot I existed until Grandma's obituary gave them an excuse to remember. Something else pulled me down that corridor. At the far end of the hallway, I noticed a semicircle of guests gathered around a wall. The lighting shifted there, dim but focused, almost theatrical. I didn't hear laughter or chatter, just the hushed cadence of people in agreement, not mourning, just reinforcing each other's memories. As I approached, my footsteps softened involuntarily, like my own body sensed I was nearing something sacred or sanitized. The memory wall. I could see the edges of ornate frames from a distance, snapshots of birthdays, beach trips, backyard barbecues, and all the curated evidence of a tight-knit family. But my name wasn't anywhere, and neither was my face. I moved closer and began scanning each image, methodically. My eyes moved the way detectives read case files, slow, sharp, deliberate. There was the 4th of July cookout, Grandma at the grill, cousins in flag-themed t-shirts. I was the one who'd organized that whole thing, coordinated the food, even paid for the fireworks. But here, I didn't exist. Photo after photo, I kept searching. Some of them I remembered taking, others I remembered being in. Yet, in these curated frames, it was as if someone had gone out of their way to scrub me out, not accidentally forgotten, but surgically removed. I stopped in front of one particular image. It was from the beach trip we took to Florida. The trip I had planned, saved for, booked. The photo showed Alethea standing alone in front of the pier, golden sunlight painting her like a magazine model. But that wasn't how I remembered it. I remembered standing beside her, holding Grandma's hand, laughing just before the camera clicked. I took a step back and whispered, "Did you crop me out?" Alethea, suddenly beside me, smirked. It looked better this way. Her voice was smooth, polite, practiced, like she'd rehearsed the line for just this occasion. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The photo said enough. The worst part wasn't being forgotten. It was being re-edited. The narrative was shifting right in front of me. They weren't just telling a version of history. They were erasing a piece of truth, and doing it with clean edges. I turned from the wall and caught sight of a table holding candles and a framed quote about love enduring. Beneath it sat the urn. Simple, elegant, heavy with meaning. I reached into my bag and pulled out a letter, a handwritten note I'd spent 3 nights crafting. It wasn't long, just enough to say goodbye the way Grandma would have wanted, unfiltered, personal. As I stepped forward to place it beside the urn, a hand intercepted me. "Babine, let the official memorial speak for itself," she said, her voice low, eyes never meeting mine. Before I could reply, she took the letter from my hand, folded it neatly without reading, and slid it under the tablecloth. I blinked. No scene, no confrontation, just quiet dismissal. As if even my grief was too disruptive, I opened my mouth but said nothing. A cold, familiar weight settled into my chest, that old feeling of being managed, like a stain they were always trying to clean before company came over. "It's not about you today," an elderly aunt murmured as she passed, her hand brushing my shoulder without affection. "Don't stir things on a sacred day." I stepped back. Apparently, even sorrow had to fit their format. My goodbye would have to happen on my own terms, later, when no one was watching. I found a seat near a window, where the afternoon light filtered through sheer curtains. I could still hear voices around the corner, laughing now. Alethea's laugh rose above the rest. Sharp. Rehearsed. I sat still. In my silence, I began tracing back through time. School assemblies where my name was skipped during acknowledgments. Birthdays that slipped Mom's mind. The way my favorite meals stopped being made after Dad died. This family didn't erase out of hate. They erased to maintain their image. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. I didn't speak yet. Just let the red recording button blink quietly. Sometimes silence is the only thing that hears you. They didn't want drama. They wanted control. And they dressed it up with words like respect, tradition, and dignity. I knew better now. Respectability wasn't about truth. It was about managing perception. My therapist once told me that. I hadn't believed her at first. I believed her now. I finally stood and walked back toward the display. My cousin Aurelia had returned to the memory wall, her eyes moving slowly across the same photos. I approached her from the side, gently tapping her arm. "Look," I said, pulling out my phone. On the screen was the original beach photo, the one I took before they cut me out. Me, Alethea, Grandma, smiling together. Aurelia's eyes widened. She didn't speak, but her lips parted like she wanted to. Before either of us could say more, Alethea appeared again. Of course she did. She looked at the screen, then me. "Some people can't let go of the past," she said, voice honeyed again. "Maybe that's why they keep getting left out of the future." I smiled. Not forced, not sarcastic, just enough to say, "I see what you're doing." But my eyes didn't soften. I wasn't going to be erased again, not quietly, not this time. After the memory board, after the cropped photos and the disapproving glances, I told someone I needed air. Not that anyone cared enough to ask where I was going, but the excuse was convenient. I slipped out through the side door of the funeral home and stepped into the garden behind the reception hall. The moment I felt the breeze on my face, I exhaled like I hadn't breathed in hours. The stone path hadn't changed, still curved gently around the rose bushes my grandmother once spent her weekends pruning, still lined with the same moss-covered bricks I used to balance on barefoot as a child. I walked slowly, as if each step would trigger a memory, and many did. I passed the bench where she used to read the paper. The little archway I once decorated with streamers for her 80th birthday. All there, quiet witnesses to everything that had gone silent inside the house. This house watched me grow up, I thought, but the people in it never saw me. I remembered one summer when I was 13. Alethea had invited her friends over. They were drinking soda from champagne glasses and giggling over a game of pretend dinner party. I came out to join. My mom told me to go back to my room. "You'll embarrass her," she said. "This isn't your space." And somehow, from that moment on, it never was again. Standing now in the same garden, I realized my absence hadn't been accidental. It had been groomed, curated, systematically normalized until even I stopped questioning it. I thought I'd pulled away, but maybe I'd just followed their cues. Near the hydrangeas, I sat down on the edge of the stone border and pulled my coat tighter. The sky had darkened a shade, clouds rolling in just enough to cast a pale tone over the afternoon light. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Alethea. "Whatever Grandma gave you, it was out of pity. Just so you know. No greeting, no condolences, just venom in a digital envelope." I stared at the screen, not surprised, but still winded. Alethea had always been territorial, over attention, over affection, over space in a room, and clearly even over a dead woman's memory. What startled me wasn't the content. It was how fast she reached for it. The funeral wasn't even over. I closed my eyes and let myself remember. Just 3 months ago, I'd visited Grandma on one of her good days. We sat right here in this garden, sharing hot tea, even though it was 80 degrees and humid. Her voice had been soft, but her mind still cut like glass. "If I could only leave my words to one person," she'd said, "it would be you." I blinked back tears and smiled. "But Mom and Alethea don't live for people who measure love by performance," she'd cut in. "They love with mirrors, not hearts." That conversation had anchored me for months. Now it became the blade I used to cut through Alethea's message. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the county's property records on my phone. The curiosity had been sitting in my chest since I first pulled into the driveway. Something about the way Alethea barked orders at the catering staff, the way Mom let her run everything without a second thought. It wasn't just emotional power. It felt legal. I typed in the address of the house. There it was. Transfer date, exactly 1 year ago. Owner of record, Alethea Whitmore. Not a co-owner, not a joint title, sole ownership. No mention of me, no explanation, no discussion. I laughed quietly, though nothing was funny. It wasn't just the house, it was the history. They hadn't just cut me out of photos. They'd reassigned the entire legacy. This wasn't about family anymore. This was about consolidation, of image, of power, of every narrative that mattered in this family. Grief throbbed behind my eyes, but I didn't let it fall. No more crying behind closed doors. No more hoping someone else would speak up on my behalf. I stood and walked the long loop around the garden, thoughts racing faster than my steps. Women in this family had always been trained to preserve. Keep the name clean. Don't raise your voice. Don't air laundry. Be polite even when insulted. Sacrifice in silence. I used to think that made them strong. Now I saw it for what it was. Generational gaslighting. My therapist once told me, "Some mothers don't break your bones. They just break the parts of you that would have made you free." I hadn't understood it then. Now, it was scripture. I thought about all the times I apologized for needing time, for saying no, for setting boundaries, and how often I was called cold, difficult, or worse, ungrateful. Today proved it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a blueprint. I wasn't the problem. I was just the only one who stopped pretending the system was working. I pulled out my phone again, opened the Notes app, typed the address, the transfer date, screenshot it. Then opened the voice memo app. This wasn't for a podcast. It wasn't for evidence. Not yet. This was for me, to stop letting my truth rot inside silence. "If this story ever gets told," I said softly into the mic, "it won't be through their filters." I paused. The wind rustled the trees behind me. I looked toward the front porch. It was empty, but I walked toward it anyway. That bench by the steps, the one my father used to wait on for the school bus, still held his outline, if not his weight. I sat there, hand still holding the phone, recording still rolling. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel erased. And the first thing I recorded was their silence. When I stepped back into the reception hall, it felt warmer, not in temperature, but in tone. Laughter hovered beneath every conversation, muffled yet rehearsed. Plates clinked softly as wine glasses were lifted and hors d'oeuvres passed from hand to hand. It had only been 20 minutes since I slipped out to the garden, but it might as well have been a different event. Nobody noticed me walk in. Or, more accurately, nobody acknowledged it. I moved slowly, weaving between small knots of relatives huddled in comfortable denial. They were recounting childhood anecdotes, half-true stories stretched thinner with every retelling. In one corner, I heard someone recall how Alethea had single-handedly organized Grandma's 85th birthday bash. That party had been mine to plan. I'd made the calls, sent the invites, baked the damn cake. Alethea arrived late, smiled for pictures, and left with all the praise. And apparently, the credit stuck. I kept walking. I spotted Uncle Charles, Mahola's husband, throwing his head back in laughter. His hand landed on Alethea's shoulder like she was a senator who'd just passed a key bill. That kind of approval wasn't given. It was passed down and protected like fine china. They don't lie out of malice, I thought. They lie out of convenience. Every room in this house was staged with pleasantries, every word designed to avoid discomfort. And people like me, we were the discomfort they dodged. I found Mahola standing alone near the refreshments. She was spooning fruit salad into a paper cup, her eyes darting between conversations like a bystander at a crime scene. I approached quietly. "You saw it," I said, voice low but firm. "That summer, when she pushed me." Mahola paused. She didn't look surprised, just cornered. Her hand lingered over the spoon before she dropped it into the bowl. "It wasn't the time to make it bigger than it already was," she said. Not a denial, just a deflection. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with recognition. They all knew. They had always known. "I didn't ask you to fight her," I said. "I asked you not to look away." She sighed. "We just wanted to keep the family together." "And you did," I replied, "by splitting me off." She didn't respond, just lowered her gaze and stirred a cup of lemonade she wasn't drinking. As I turned to walk away, a glint caught my eye. Alethea. She stood by the front window, chatting with two of our distant cousins. Her blouse was cream satin, buttoned to perfection, and fastened at the collar with an antique gold and garnet brooch. My breath caught. That brooch, it was Grandma's. Not just jewelry, a legacy. I remembered the exact moment she handed it to me 2 years ago, wrapped in velvet and trembling fingers. "This is your shield," she had whispered, "for the days they make you feel small." And now it was pinned to Alethea's lapel like a trophy. I approached her slowly, each step measured. "That wasn't given to you," I said, my voice steady. Alethea didn't miss a beat. She turned, eyes wide in faux surprise, and said, "It was in the drawer. First come, first served." She might as well have said, "You should have gotten here earlier if it mattered." Our mother walked by just then, not even breaking stride. "They're just things, dear," she muttered. "Don't be dramatic." I stood there, feeling the sting not from the loss of the brooch, but from the loss of meaning. To them, it was just another shiny piece of costume. To me, it was armor. I looked at Alethea one more time. She knew exactly what she was doing. And that was the moment I knew I'd draw a line, not loudly, not with shouting or scene-making, but with intention. I slipped away again, this time out onto the back deck. The sun had dipped a little lower in the sky, casting golden slants across the floorboards. I leaned against the railing, letting the tension in my back settle. I stared at the horizon, then at the reflection of the window, my own silhouette blurred but present. People expected my silence. They counted on it. It kept things tidy. But boundaries aren't walls. They're bridges you refuse to collapse anymore. I pulled out my phone, opened the Notes app, and started a list. Every incident, every phrase, every omission dressed up as tradition. I scrolled through the photos I had saved, screenshots, messages, voice memos, small pieces of a bigger story no one else was documenting. I wasn't going to stay until the end. I didn't need to. But I had one more thing to do before I left. I re-entered the reception hall. The noise had returned to its mid-afternoon hum. People were lounging more freely now, unburdened by ceremony. No one looked up as I passed. I approached the tribute table. The memory wall still stood tall, those perfectly framed images, still void of me. I reached into my purse, pulled out a ballpoint pen, and flipped over the largest group photo, one taken at a family reunion I had organized. I hadn't been in the frame because I was behind the camera, making sure everyone else smiled on cue. On the back, I wrote, "You can crop me out of your pictures, but you'll never rewrite the truth." I placed it back down, text facing the table. No flourish, no announcement. As I stepped away, I noticed Aunt Vivian glance in my direction. Our eyes met for half a second. She saw the movement, maybe even the writing, but said nothing. Of course she didn't. They thought I was done, but I was just getting organized. I sat alone in the private guest room, a converted parlor with antique wallpaper and a faint scent of lemon polish clinging to the floorboards. The air in that room was still, like it didn't want to disturb the carefully constructed calm outside. Through the frosted glass of the door, I could hear polite laughter and the occasional clink of glasses. From the way it sounded, you'd think we were celebrating a graduation, not grieving a woman who deserved more than staged condolences and sugar-dusted mini tarts. I pulled out my phone, not to check the time, but to distract myself from stepping back out there. My thumb hovered over the notifications. And then I saw it. Alethea had tagged me in a photo. Click. It opened to a post with her signature aesthetic, warm filter, scripted caption, just enough grief to seem poetic without disrupting the brand. 3 generations strong. Rest well, Grandma. Hashtag legacy Namashvar family first. The photo. Alethea and Babin, standing on either side of Grandma's framed portrait, smiles measured, coordinated outfits on point. Me, absent, again. The comment section was already full of admiration. You always held this family together, Alethea. Just like your mom, pure class. Your strength inspires me. I didn't feel anger, not immediately. Just that familiar weight pressing down on my chest. That old companion, invisibility. In the age of filters, I thought, truth doesn't disappear. It just gets buried under the algorithm. I typed something, then erased it. Let them talk. Let them stage. I'd stopped auditioning for roles in their little play. Just as I locked my screen, my younger cousin Cassie walked in, holding her phone out. "Have you seen this?" she asked, grinning. It was a TikTok. The opening frame showed Alethea arranging flowers. Then came a rapid montage of family clips, vacations, parties, milestone birthdays. The music. A slow, sentimental instrumental I recognized from a home goods commercial. But there it was again, every memory neatly edited, every shot chosen with intention, and every single one without me. "Isn't this beautiful?" Cassie asked, clearly moved. "It's beautifully false," I answered. She blinked, unsure if I was joking. I handed her back the phone and watched her expression shift into confusion, then discomfort. I didn't need her to understand right now. But the seed was planted. That wasn't a tribute. It was branding. Alethea wasn't just performing for the family. She was performing for an audience. Likes, reposts, admiration. Their grief had become content, and inconvenient truths, like my presence, were edited out with professional precision. Back in the room alone, I walked toward the built-in bookshelf. An old drawer underneath had always been filled with things nobody knew what to do with. I opened it out of habit. Inside, a manila envelope with my name scrawled in my mother's handwriting. My stomach knotted. I knew that envelope, vaguely. I remembered her handing it to me months ago, something about consolidating documents for tax season. "Just sign it, dear. It's housekeeping," she had said. I opened the envelope with deliberate care. Inside was a notarized document, waiver of inheritance rights, effective immediately. My hands trembled, not from shock, but from the sheer precision of it all. I hadn't signed away my rights. I had signed away their excuses. They'd planned this, not in haste, not in panic, but in calculation. I wasn't supposed to notice. I wasn't supposed to ask. I was just supposed to keep the peace. That phrase rang in my ears like a curse. Let's just keep the peace. Translation? Let's protect the image. Let's not disturb the hierarchy. Let's make sure the nice dishes still come out when guests visit. I folded the document slowly and slid it into my bag. And then I stood. My footsteps led me down the hall to the restroom. I locked the door behind me and leaned over the sink. Cold water ran over my fingers before I splashed it on my face. When I looked up, my reflection stared back, eyes wide, jaw tight. I didn't look sad anymore. I looked awake. Maya Angelou once said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." I believed them now. I dried my face, pulled my hair back into a bun, and straightened my shoulders. I wasn't going to cry into hand towels or ask why anymore. I was going to document everything, not out of spite, but out of survival. A knock came on the door, and I ignored it. Whoever it was could wait. I was done being rushed. Later that evening, the reception had turned into something resembling a networking event. Old friends exchanging business cards, cousins gossiping about marriages gone stale. In the corner, Babin and Alethea were posing for another photo. This time with the minister. Smiles rehearsed, angles tested, image preserved. I watched them from the hallway just out of view. I opened my notes app, typed, "The next time someone lies about me, I'll have proof they didn't expect. I walked back to the private room, retrieved the envelope again, took photos of every page, and uploaded them to a new cloud folder titled, For the Record. There was no urgency in my movements, just precision. They thought they were safeguarding the family. What they were really doing was building a platform for me to stand on. As I exited the building, the air had cooled. I paused on the steps and looked back through the window. Alethea was laughing loudly at something I couldn't hear, but her laugh sounded like ownership. She thinks she owns the story, but I've got the receipts. By twilight, the temperature had dropped just enough to sting the fingertips. The sun, stretched thin across the cemetery, painted long golden shadows that made the headstones glow like embers. A gentle breeze moved through the air, but it carried no peace, just a strange, tense silence that clung to everyone like static. I stood a few feet back from the cluster forming around the open grave. The burial was about to begin, the minister gently beckoning us to gather. Most of the family had already formed a semicircle. Alethea and Babin stood side by side, close enough their elbows brushed with every movement. They looked like political candidates presenting a united front. A cousin handed me a single white rose. My fingers wrapped around the stem, but not before noticing that the others, those who stood closer, held small printed cards, personalized with Grandma's photo and one of Alethea's carefully selected quotes. Of course, even grief here had levels, I thought. And I was standing on the basement floor. My knuckles tightened around the flower, not from the cold, but from a pressure that had been building for days. No, years. It was a scream that had never left my throat. I took a small step forward and caught Alethea's eye. She looked at me like I was trespassing. The velvet box sat on the small pedestal near the foot of the casket, discreet but deliberate. I knew what it was before I reached it. Grandma's pendant, the one she wore every Sunday, the one she promised to me with shaking hands and teary eyes. I stepped forward, gently, but with purpose. My hand moved toward the box, and Alethea intercepted it. "You don't get to touch what you didn't earn," she said, voice low, face carved from ice. I blinked. "She gave that to me." She stepped in closer. "Then you should have gotten here earlier." Her arm shot out. It wasn't a nudge. It wasn't an accident. It was a shove meant to send a message. My heel caught something behind me, a small, hidden edge of a burial stone. I tried to catch myself, arms flailing for balance, but I was already too far gone. A sharp, sickening snap rang out. It echoed louder than any prayer ever spoken there. Pain burst through my leg like a lightning bolt. I went down hard, a scream tearing from my chest before I could even register it. The crowd gasped. No one moved. Babin rushed forward, but not to me. She held her palms out toward the guests. "Not here, not now." The words came like a chant, not of concern, but control. My cheek pressed to the grass. I was disoriented. The pain was hot, blinding, like every nerve in my body had been rewired. I tried to shift, to sit upright, but my leg wouldn't move. It throbbed in pulses, each beat sharper than the last. Then came the second wave of humiliation. As I struggled to sit up, my shoulders slammed into the coffin stand. The impact knocked over a bouquet, one tied with Grandma's favorite blue silk ribbon. The arrangement collapsed across the ground, petals scattering like accusations. Gasps again. Alethea let out a theatrical cry, stepping back with the grace of a soap opera actress. "Oh my God!" she exclaimed, hand to her chest. "She knocked into the casket." Guests murmured. Some looked horrified, but not at what had just been done to me. They were horrified at the scene, the disruption. "She always ruins things," someone muttered behind me. I looked up. My mother stood a few feet away, her lips moving silently. I read them. Drama. Again. It wasn't concern. It wasn't shock. It was disdain, as if my injury was just an inconvenience. In that moment, I understood. The coffin wasn't the only sacred thing here. The silence, the control, was the real thing they were mourning, and I had broken it. The pain in my leg throbbed, but sharper still was the ache in my chest, the part of me that still wanted them to care. A teenage boy, someone's son I barely knew, stepped toward me, offering a hand. But Babine intercepted him with a gentle touch on the shoulder. "We don't make a scene at a funeral." She said it like a rule, like a prayer. I bit down on the scream building in my throat and rolled to one side, trying to get upright. I broke a bone, I thought, but they broke the part of me that begged for their care. There was no ambulance, no panic, just whispers, judgments. I used my good arm to prop myself up, sitting with my weight on the uninjured side. Every shift sent fire up my leg, but I met every stare around me with my chin held steady. Let them look. Let them see what they'd done. No one spoke to me, no one helped. I sat there long enough for the sky to change again, orange light dimming to gray. And then I spoke. "If I die in this graveyard," I said, voice low but slicing through the tension, "at least I'll know I didn't lie to get here." Some turned away, others looked at the ground. Alethea backed farther into the crowd, the pendants of her earrings swinging as she turned. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the camera. My hand was shaking, but I hit record anyway. People shifted. Some scoffed. One aunt whispered, "Is she filming?" Yes, I was. The lens captured the scene as it was, unfiltered, unposed, just the raw reality of what silence had built, and what it looked like when silence was broken. Babine approached slowly, her heels silent in the grass. She leaned down, not to help, but to whisper, "Stop filming, Valdis. Don't ruin the sacred air." I looked her in the eye and pressed the red button. She flinched, not visibly, but I saw it. She hadn't expected me to record the truth. But I'd stopped asking for permission. The evening settled over the funeral home's parking lot like a final curtain. The sun had slipped behind the chapel's steeple, and twilight bathed everything in a half-truth hue. My legs still throbbed from the fall. No, the shove. But I didn't limp. Not where they could see. A stranger, someone I barely remembered from childhood, had helped me up. No one from my immediate family had moved. As we walked toward the car, I noticed Babine walking ahead of me, back perfectly straight, her heels clicking in an even rhythm. She didn't turn around once. Alethea trailed behind her, whispering to a couple of guests as she smiled and nodded, already spinning whatever narrative she had ready. "It was just a stumble," I heard her say, sweet as syrup. "She's fine." Someone nearby offered me water, which I declined. Everything around me smelled like lavender and dishonesty. The way people avoided eye contact, the way they smiled too much, spoke too softly, performance down to the last blink. I wasn't hurt by the fall. I was wounded by the applause when I got up. There was a shift happening, one I could feel in the air. I wasn't just being erased anymore. I was being reframed. And the story they were building was loud, rehearsed, and moving faster than I could track. Inside the hallway, the fluorescent lighting felt colder. Babine finally turned to face me as I reached the foyer. "Please," she said, voice low, her smile stretched thin. "For once, don't make this about you. Let the air stay sacred." It wasn't a request. It was a warning, dressed in pleasantry. That phrase cut deeper than the pain in my leg. Let the air stay sacred, not the truth, not the love, just the air. I was always the smoke in their perfect room, I thought, the one who fogged their polished mirrors. I tried to speak, but nothing came. My voice had dried up somewhere between rage and restraint. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of a scene. Her words repeated in my mind like a script I never agreed to. Sacred air. Sacred to who? Next time someone tried to use a phrase like that to shut me down, I'd speak louder, clearer, and they wouldn't like what they heard. As I approached the exit, one of the guests, another distant cousin, rushed up beside me, phone in hand. "Have you seen this?" she asked, holding the screen up like she'd discovered something amusing. It was a video, already uploaded, already shared. The clip showed me mid-fall at the gravesite, but it had been cropped, perfectly timed to start the moment I stumbled and cut before I hit the ground. No context, no Alethea, no shove. The caption read, "When the black sheep acts up again, at Grandma's funeral no less." The comments below were merciless. She always needs to be the center of attention. Some people never grow up. Poor Alethea. She's dealt with this her whole life. And then I saw it. Alethea's comment. "We forgive, but we don't entertain chaos. Hashtag family first." My stomach flipped. Not with shock. By now, that currency had lost value, but with a hollow, white-hot clarity. They hadn't just lied. They were manipulating memory. And worse, they were doing it with likes and hashtags. I didn't yell, didn't throw the phone. I handed it back calmly and thanked her for showing me. A voice behind me, older, unfamiliar, whispered, "That didn't look like a fall to me." I turned slightly, caught her eyes, nodded once. I pulled out my phone. No rage, no panic, just purpose. I began screen recording the video, then took screenshots of every comment, especially Alethea's. My fingers worked with surgical calm. A line from a podcast I once loved floated into my head. Every lie you let slide becomes a truth in someone else's mouth. I wasn't going to let this one slide. My silence wasn't submission anymore. It was strategy. With my files saved, I walked out to my car. Each step sent a pulse of fire through my leg, but I kept moving, kept breathing. Dignity wasn't in the absence of pain. It was in the refusal to give them the theater they expected. I reached the car, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door. Alone, at last. The car was quiet, just the faint hum of the cooling engine and the distant murmur of the reception behind me. I reached for my phone again. This time, I opened the voice recorder. "This isn't about revenge," I said, my voice even. "This is about restoring the record." I created a new folder on my device, naming it Reality Draft 1. Inside it, I dropped the video, the screenshots, the photos I'd taken of the legal waiver. Truth doesn't need an invitation, it just needs a record. Just as I finished organizing, a notification buzzed across the screen. An unknown number. The message read, "You're lucky that didn't go worse. No name." No punctuation. But I knew the tone, threat dressed as concern. I leaned back against the headrest, staring through the windshield at the darkening sky. "If they think this was my breaking point," I whispered, "they haven't seen what happens when I rebuild." Then, almost smiling, I hit record one more time. "They've crafted a lie. I'm about to publish the truth." By the time I made it home, my body had settled into a kind of numb ache. My leg, still bandaged and bruised, throbbed beneath the layers of gauze like it was pulsing with its own memory of what happened. I didn't take off my coat right away. I just stood in the middle of the living room, dimly lit by the lamp in the corner, and listened to the quiet. No voices, no stares, no scripts, just me. I settled onto the couch, propped my leg up on two cushions, and let the silence grow roots around me. It wasn't peaceful, not yet, but it was honest. The buzzing started soon after. Text messages, mentions. Alethea had posted a photo. Again. This one from the reception. A smile, her hand on Babine's shoulder, captioned with a Bible verse and the words, "Legacy and Light." I didn't bother reading the comments. I knew what they'd say. "She's so graceful. Always keeping the family together." That version of the story would live online forever if I didn't do something. I got up slowly, careful not to twist wrong, and walked, hobbled, to my desk drawer. I knew exactly what I was looking for. The envelope with my name in Grandma's handwriting. I hadn't opened it yet. I'd waited. Tonight felt like the night. I sat back down, peeled the seal open, and unfolded the pages inside. The note was brief, but every word rang with precision. Grandma's handwriting was neat. No tremor in the ink. "They won't believe what I've said. That's why I said it to you. This house, this family name, it doesn't belong to liars." I pressed the letter to my chest, then unfolded it again, reading slower. Beneath those lines was a list. Items, wishes, a name. Mine. Written clearly. She had documented everything. Heirlooms, intentions, legal references, and tucked in the envelope was a business card, Jamela Langley, attorney at law. I knew that name. The tears came, but not from grief. They came from relief. Validation. From realizing that even in her final weeks, Grandma had prepared for this. For me, she left me the one thing they would never have, the truth on paper. I placed the letter into a plastic sleeve, slid it into a folder I labeled in bold ink. Legal, not emotional. It was time to act. The next morning, I wrapped my leg tighter, threw on a loose coat, and limped into Jamela's office without calling ahead. The building was older, tucked between a flower shop and a dry cleaner on East Washington Ave. Inside, it smelled like old books and lavender hand sanitizer. Jamela looked up from her desk as I entered. "You're the one she said would come," she said. Not a question, a statement. I nodded, handing her the envelope. She read it silently, nodded, and stood. "Follow me." In the back room, Jamela pulled 2 files from a locked cabinet. "This is what your grandmother signed 3 months before her death," she said, laying out the original document. "And this," she continued, pulling out a second folder, "is the version filed by Alethea and Babin after." Even at a glance, the differences were staggering. Items missing, provisions rerouted, clauses added in handwriting that wasn't Grandma's. Jamela pointed to the signature line. "That's not her pen stroke," she said. "You're sure?" "I have notarized records and handwriting samples. Your grandmother was a meticulous woman." I sat there, silent. Not from shock, from focus. They hadn't just tried to exclude me from the moment. They tried to write me out of history. If they forged her signature, I thought, they underestimated her voice, and mine. Jamela slid the originals into an envelope. "You'll need legal representation. I can refer you. This doesn't go away with an apology." "I'm not looking for one," I replied. "I'm looking for accountability." That evening, I spread the files out on my kitchen table, like puzzle pieces to a story they never expected me to solve. I scanned the letter, saved it under encrypted backup, did the same with the will. I recorded a video testimony, just me, clear lighting, reading Grandma's letter out loud. No rage, no dramatics, just truth. Then I opened my laptop, screenshots, texts, time-stamped photos, voice memos. I gathered everything. Created folders, labeled each with clarity. The photos from the garden talk, the one of the necklace, the altered obituary draft Alethea had once emailed me by mistake. Each file was a nail in the coffin of their illusion. Sometimes power doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from showing receipts. I drafted an email to a legal aid contact I had helped fund during a charity case years ago. Subject line, "Prepared to proceed." My finger hovered over the send button. Then my phone buzzed. A text from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 years. "Thought you should see this," it said. Attached, a screenshot of a group chat. Alethea. "She signed it. She didn't even read it. It's locked in now." Another message followed from someone I didn't recognize. "Then we're good. She can scream all she wants." My fingers curled tight over the edge of the table. I opened the folder on my computer titled grandmaoriginal.pdf. I dragged it into my cloud drive, shared it with 2 attorneys, then clicked copy link. They thought I kept memories. I kept receipts. Aunt Vesta's house looked like a postcard that forgot to add a return address. White siding, blue shutters, hydrangeas clipped with military precision. A red, white, and blue welcome sign still hung crooked on the porch, probably leftover from the 4th of July. I arrived early, on purpose, not to help, not to linger, just to look around before the theater started. Inside, the table had been set with polished silverware and fake gratitude, linen napkins folded into swans, candles, unlit but ornamental. The dining room smelled like rosemary chicken and tension. I took my seat at the far end of the table, close enough to hear, but far enough to be ignored. The cousins whispered as they filed in, eyes darting toward me, then away. Alethea walked in last, smiling like she was hosting a gala. Her hair was styled, her blouse ironed to perfection. She looked like a woman who hadn't recently shoved her sister into a gravestone. Babin hovered beside her like a well-trained shadow. I watched, quiet, calm, waiting. Nothing like a nice tablecloth, I thought, to cover up generational rot. Aunt Vesta raised a glass. To unity, she said with a brittle smile. To healing and family. A few murmured, cheers. I sipped water. Dinner passed in a blur of forced civility. Conversation tiptoed around the obvious. No one asked about my leg. No one asked what I'd been up to since the funeral. And then dessert arrived. Alethea stood, fork in hand, tapping her glass lightly. I just want to say, she began, that despite the emotional challenges of the past week, I'm proud of how we've come together. Families go through hard times, but love wins. There was a pause, then obedient nods, a few claps, the kind of applause meant for keeping peace, not praising truth. I reached under my chair, pulled out a simple folder, and placed it squarely in the center of the table. Silence dropped like a curtain. I opened it slowly. Photographs, my bruised leg, my bandaged shoulder, a close-up of the signature line on Grandma's will, the forged one. And finally, Grandma's original handwritten letter, notarized and dated. Gasps. Actual audible gasps. Aunt Vesta's hand flew to her chest. This is not the time. I looked directly at her. When you're never given time to speak, I said, you make your own timing. Alethea's smile cracked, just a hair. This is wildly inappropriate, she said, her voice sharp around the edges. No, I replied. Rewriting someone's last will is inappropriate. Posting doctored videos online is inappropriate. Lying in public while calling it family business, that's offensive. Nobody moved. I stood, walked to the living room, and with 2 taps projected my phone screen onto the smart TV. The homepage of a website appeared. Whitmore Legacy Foundation. Grandma's face at the top. Donation links beneath it. But the payment processor, Alethea's personal PayPal. What is this? Someone asked. Alethea scrambled to speak. It was in progress. I hadn't registered it properly yet. I scrolled down, screenshots of the charity's backend, messages from a group chat where Alethea had typed, going to flip her name into a brand. People eat that up. The room tilted. Uncle Ron stood and said, This is disgusting. Alethea turned to Babin, looking for backup, but Babin just sipped her wine. Her face gave away nothing. No yelling followed. No chaos. Just silence so dense it choked the air. I turned back to the table. This isn't vengeance, I said. This is the audit. Someone at the far end whispered, We should have asked more questions. Cousin Aurelia reached out, gently placed her hand on mine. No words, just pressure, solidarity. One by one, people began excusing themselves. No hugs, no goodbyes. Not to Alethea. She stood frozen by the fireplace, hands still clasped like she might give another speech. I gathered my folder and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, sat alone. I heard the front door open, then close again. I didn't turn to look. Alethea lingered in the hallway, her heels pausing on the tile. Babin followed behind her, said nothing, then quietly pulled the door shut behind them. Aunt Vesta returned from the front room, pale and trembling. I had no idea, she muttered. I looked up. You didn't want to have one. She didn't argue. I finished my tea slowly, the kind of slow reserved for final acts. My phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. It read, You just made a powerful enemy. I smiled. Good. I'd been surrounded by fake friends long enough. The house was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional passing car outside. I sat by the window with a mug of coffee cooling in my hand, watching steam curl away from the surface. My inbox was full. Emails, missed calls, messages from family members who hadn't spoken to me in years, suddenly remembering my name. Some were empty check-ins, wrapped in false concern. Others were soft threats in polite language. The video from Aunt Vesta's dinner had gone viral. Well, as viral as a family dinner clip could within a mid-sized town. The clip of me calmly placing the folder on the table, exposing the will, followed by the projections of Alethea's fake charity, had done more than stir conversation. It forced people to pick a side. And not everyone chose silence this time. I didn't need their applause. I didn't even need their opinions. I needed the record corrected. I dressed slowly that morning, professional but simple. A blazer, dark jeans, the pendant Grandma gave me tucked under my shirt. No statement necklace, no makeup armor, just me. I headed to the law office, documents secured in a hard case. The same office where Hamela, once reluctant, now waited for me with something new in her eyes. Conviction. She stood as I entered. "They've been served," she said, holding up 2 envelopes stamped with official insignia. Alethea and Babin were being investigated for document tampering, forgery, and fraud. I didn't smile, just nodded. "And there's more," she added. "I'll testify." That caught me off guard. "You'll what?" "I kept notes, copies. I never thought I'd need them, but—" She exhaled. "I didn't want to believe they'd do it, but now I see. They always thought they could." I extended my hand. She took it. "Thank you," I said. Not like a friend, not like a partner in arms, but like someone who sees accountability and knows how rare it is. We reviewed the timeline, finalized documentation, clarified what was admissible and what wasn't. Jamela was methodical, no dramatics, no flair. She was the kind of quiet that didn't apologize anymore. Later that afternoon, I returned home to finalize my prep. I uploaded files, named every folder with precision. Inheritance, forgery, charity fraud. I even made a subfolder titled Public Narrative, just in case someone tried to distort the story again. A local journalist reached out for a statement. I declined. I didn't need to tell my story to strangers, I thought. I just needed to protect its ending. The legal process moved slower than fury, but steadier than grief. Initial filings, testimony prep, formal interviews. I answered questions with clipped precision, careful with my words, but never timid. The court wasn't a stage, it was a mirror. I didn't want retribution, I wanted correction. In the following days, I started noticing shifts. Invitations rescinded. A family group chat's going quiet. Cousins who once cheered Alethea's every post now liked mine. No dramatic fallout, just a quiet erosion of power. One night, I walked past a local cafe and overheard 2 women talking. She used her grandma's name to funnel donations. I mean, who does that? I kept walking. At home, I curled up with a notebook, not to plan, but to breathe. That's when the voicemail came. It was Babin. Her voice cracked more than it should have. "You've made your point," she said, "but you've ruined your sister's life. Are you proud of that?" I replayed it twice, not because I needed clarity, because I wanted to feel nothing. I saved it, then deleted it from my main inbox. I opened a new folder on my laptop, labeled it Emotional Leverage. Not for court, for closure. I leaned back in my chair, the house quiet again. No ringing phones, no knocking doors, just the aftermath. Pride wasn't the goal. Freedom was. I opened the curtains without hesitation this time. The sunlight slipped in across the hardwood floor like a welcome I didn't have to earn. There was no buzzing from my phone, no pending messages blinking red on the screen. Just quiet. I stood there for a moment longer than usual, my hand still gripping the curtain as if I needed to convince myself this piece was real. Once, silence meant abandonment, I whispered aloud to no one. Now, it means I get to decide what's worth speaking into. I made a list that morning, not of to-dos or errands, but names, people I no longer needed to answer. I deleted entire threads, unsubscribed from family group chats, blocked 3 numbers, not out of pettiness, out of clarity. Then I brewed coffee, and for the first time in months, sat down and finished a book. Not a court filing, not a document review, a book, fiction, soft and slow. I was halfway through the last chapter when the memory came to me. Not a painful one, just a reminder of how far I'd come. A friend had texted me days ago, "Alethea's telling people you destroyed the family over money." I hadn't even flinched when I read it. That script belongs to them, I said to myself. I've got my own story now. Later that week, I met with my therapist at a cafe near her office. We didn't talk about strategy, no updates on legal movements or toxic relatives. We just talked about breathing. She sipped her chai slowly, then asked me something I wasn't expecting. What would you do if they apologized? I thought for a moment. I wouldn't believe them, I said. But I'd believe myself more. She smiled. That's the difference between healing and needing permission to heal. Forgiveness doesn't always look like a hug. Sometimes it's just not waiting anymore. The next afternoon, I heard the knock. Soft. Twice. Then a pause. I opened the door to see Babin standing there, no coat despite the chill, her hands empty, not even clutching her usual handkerchief of dignity. I don't want to fight, she said. Good, I replied, stepping aside without enthusiasm. I don't want to perform. We stood in my hallway for a minute, not awkward, just unfinished. She scanned the apartment like she was looking for something to criticize, but the words didn't come. I didn't offer her tea, she didn't ask to sit. It's hard to be a mother, she finally said. I met her eyes. It's harder to be a daughter who learns her mother's love had a price tag. There was no flare of drama, no slap of denial, just a breath and a nod. She left without slamming the door. That, I supposed, was a small mercy. The day after that, I walked through the bookstore down the street. No list, no mission, just time. I picked up a blank journal. Not for court notes or evidence logs, just thoughts. I sat by the front window, the sunlight warm on my cheek, and wrote one line on the first page. I am not healed, but I'm not hostage anymore. No need for declarations, no letters sent, no last words required. Freedom isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a sigh that doesn't carry fear. I began outlining a talk I'd been invited to give for a local survivors group. Not because I wanted to be a voice, but because I had finally found mine. The pages filled slowly, honestly. I didn't aim to inspire, I aimed to be real. And then, that evening, as I stepped out of the cafe after a quiet dinner and coffee refill, I nearly bumped into Aurelia. She looked like she had been waiting. Without a word, she handed me a small USB drive. You should have this, she said. I didn't give you everything that night. I raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions, just nodded and slipped it into my coat pocket. At home, I made tea, lit a candle, and plugged it into my laptop. 3 folders popped up on the screen. Receipts, voice memos, draft apology, .docx. The last one sat heavy on my chest. I double-clicked the first audio file. Alethea's voice came through, muffled slightly but unmistakable. I didn't think she'd push back. She never has before. I reached for the spacebar. And I hit pause, not because I couldn't listen, but because I finally didn't need to. Bạn muốn tôi chuẩn bị nội dung sẵn ngay khi mở lại không?